Late in the afternoon, the Walker farm lay bathed in the soft gold of a late summer sun. The fields around the house were full of tall grass that swayed gently in a warm breeze. A narrow dirt lane led from the road to the farmhouse, passing the old red barn and a grove of oak trees that shaded the creek. At the edge of that creek, three sisters laughed and ran barefoot in the shallow water. 11-year-old Sienna kicked her feet, sending little splashes into the air. 9-year-old Bella bent to examine a smooth pebble, turning it over in her small hands. 14-year-old Chloe stood on a fallen log, arms outstretched like a tightrope walker, daring herself to keep her balance. For the Walker family, life on the farm was simple and familiar. Every morning, Wade and Mary rose before sunrise. Wade fed the chickens, checked the fences, and coaxed the cows into the barn. Mary prepared breakfast and packed lunches. On weekends, the whole family helped tend the vegetable garden or gathered berries in the woods. The girls had grown up with the rhythm of farm life, waking with the crows, chasing after the dog Rusty, and exploring the fields until dusk. They were used to wide open spaces and clear skies, and they felt free and safe in the world their parents had built. That afternoon, Mary had given the girls permission to play by the creek for an hour or so. She trusted the three sisters more than any neighborhood children because they knew every hidden hole in the creek bank and every twist in the fallen branches. Mary glanced at her watch. It was almost 4 o'clock. She called out from the back porch for them to start heading home soon, and the sound of their laughter drifted back to her. Satisfied, she turned back to the kitchen to wash dishes and prepare dinner. Inside the farmhouse, warm scents of tomato soup and fresh bread mingled as Mary stirred the soup pot. The farmhouse kitchen was cozy, with wooden floors that creaked when you stepped. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains, and rundown cabinets held well-worn pots and pans. Mary moved through the familiar space with steady confidence. She set the table and yanked 2 loaves of bread from the oven, smiling at the memory of Chloe sneaking a slice with butter earlier that day. Across the fields, Wade finished his chores. He topped off water buckets in the horse stable and checked the fence line for broken boards. The oak grove near the creek offered shelter for wildlife, and sometimes he spotted deer drinking from the water at dawn. Today he found a loose plank in the fence where the horses liked to push through and set it right. He leaned on his tool belt and wiped sweat from his brow, satisfied with the work. He glanced toward the creek, expecting to see his daughter's familiar silhouettes. Back at the creek, the sisters enjoyed their game of pretend. Sienna imagined herself a mermaid queen commanding the water around her, while Bella played a curious archaeologist uncovering hidden treasures. Chloe, the eldest, pretended to be an explorer charting unknown lands. They yelled out play names to each other, voices full of joy, carrying over the gentle trickle of the water. Rusty, their golden retriever, padded in and out of the shallow stream, chasing tadpoles and occasionally barking at a leaf drifting by. Time slipped past without notice. The sun dipped toward the horizon, setting the sky ablaze with pinks and oranges. Shadows grew long, and the air cooled. At around 6 o'clock, the girls decided to explore farther upstream, where the water ran deeper and the rocks formed small pools. They climbed carefully over mossy stones, laughing when one of them twisted an ankle slightly. But none of them thought of danger. They felt strong and careful, guided by Chloe's steady hand. Meanwhile, Mary called again from the porch. Dinner was ready, and she expected the girls any minute. Moments passed, and no reply came. She furrowed her brow and wandered outside, towel in hand. The table stood set under the porch light, steam rising from the bowls of soup. Mary called, "Louder this time, girls. It's getting late." Her voice held a gentle concern. In return, only the evening song of crickets and the rustle of leaves answered her call. Mary dropped the towel. She ran to the edge of the porch and scanned the fields. There was no sign of the girls. They had kicked off shoes and toys. Those lay scattered near the creek bank, in plain view. A red ribbon that Bella always tied in her hair floated in the grass. Mary felt a cold knot of worry twist in her chest. She shouted again, but only her echo returned. At the same moment, Wade stepped out of the barn with a pitchfork in hand. He saw Mary's worried face and the empty fields beyond. He called her name, and she pointed toward the creek. They both sprinted across the tall grass, coaxing Rusty to follow. The dog's barking joined in, echoing off the trees. When they reached the creek, the water glinted under the last rays of sunlight. The girls' toys lay on the bank, a doll with one shoe, a jar of marbles left half full, and a small plastic shovel. But no girls. They called each name Chloe, Sienna, Bella, voices raw with fear. Their breaths came in gasps. Wade's knees trembled as he peered into the deepest pool. Mary's heart pounded against her ribs like a drum. They searched nearby patches of woods, behind logs, in tall grass. Every so often, Mary's voice cracked as she shouted their names. Wade scanned the winding creek, hoping to see a flash of movement, a shoe, something to guide them. But all he saw was dark water and silent trees. A few neighbors spotted Wade's truck racing down the dirt lane. They dropped what they were doing, a plow in the field, a picnic in their yard, and rushed over. The farmhouse lights shone in the gathering dusk, signal flares of panic. Within minutes, a small search party assembled. Men with flashlights and binoculars fanned out through the fields. Women and children formed a line beside the creek bank. Someone called the sheriff's office. The Walkers and their neighbors combed the area, calling out names in the deepening twilight. Inside the farmhouse, Mary sat at the table, hands covering. Her face, Wade hugged her from behind and whispered that they would find their daughters, but no one knew what to do next. Someone brought blankets and warm tea. The table still held warm bowls of half-eaten soup. The aroma, once comforting, now carried the weight of sorrow. Nearby, 2 deputies drove onto the property. They parked under the porch light and spoke with Wade and Mary. The deputies scribbled notes in their pads and comforted the family as best they could. They alerted the county sheriff, who ordered a full search foot patrols, horses, and a pair of tracking dogs. Someone would send up a coordinate beacon for a nighttime search by drone if needed. By 9 o'clock, spotlights from sheriff vehicles lit the farm and creek. Searchlights danced over the water's surface, reflecting in dark ripples. The dogs sniffed at the banks, guided by handlers. Investigators took photos of the scene, marked footprints and disturbed grass, and collected the girls' last known items as evidence. The air was still, save for the quiet whine of a drone overhead. Wade paced near the barn, exhausted but unable to stop. Mary knelt by the creek's edge, dropping pebbles into the water, as if the ripples could echo her daughter's return. Neighbors offered sandwiches and blankets. Some quietly cried. Others tried to talk through plans where to look next, which fields remained unchecked.
Oh.
The night grew deeper, and the search extended past the farm, into woods and neighboring farms. Still 3 sisters remained missing. Their parents sat on the porch steps, hands clasped, watching the search team scatter into the darkness. Neither Mary nor Wade slept that night. Each time a dog barked or a flashlight beam swung past, their hearts leaped. But as dawn approached, the search teams gathered back and no new clues appeared. The creek was clear, the fields empty. Only the early morning calls of birds broke the silence. 3 girls, full of life and laughter just hours before, were gone without a trace. The Walker farm stood quiet, the sun rising on a new day that would mark the beginning of an ordeal no family should ever face. And as the first light revealed the empty banks of the creek, one question haunted everyone. Where had the girls gone? Sheriff Cole Thompson arrived before sunrise the next morning. His dark pickup rolled onto the lane, headlights cutting through mist that hovered low over the fields. He stepped out, boots crunching on gravel, and paused to take in the silent farm. Mary and Wade Walker stood at the edge of their porch, faces drawn and pale. No words were needed. The sheriff nodded once and motioned toward the creek. Investigators moved quietly across the damp grass. A pair of cadaver dogs, noses close to the ground, sniffed at every footprint and broken twig. Deputies watched from the barn's open doors while a drone hovered overhead. Its soft whir were mirroring the bird songs. Detective Laura Ruiz knelt by the water's edge, examining the bank where the girls had last been seen. She noted the scattered toys, the single red ribbon, the pattern of footprints that faded into the creek and never returned. She snapped photos and marked each spot with small orange cones. At breakfast inside the farmhouse, Mary stirred her tea without looking up. She felt empty and hollow. Wade offered her a small piece of toast, but she could not swallow. Their surviving son, 16-year-old Aaron, sat at the table, rubbing his eyes. He had not slept either. He thought of his sisters Sienna's fiery laughter, Bella's quiet curiosity, and Chloe's protective smile. He craved any scrap of news, any shred of hope that they might be found safe. But this morning brought only more questions. Outside, Detective Ruiz gathered the team. It would split into two groups. One unit would search upstream through the woods, examining every hollow log and low branch. The other would comb downstream, checking old river bends and overgrown thickets. Volunteers from neighboring farms joined, forming lines that stretched across fields. Children carried flashlights and thermoses of cocoa. Elders stood by, hands clasped, eyes bright with worry. Rumors spread as fast as the search lines moved. Some said the girls had wandered too far and fallen into an old well. Others whispered about a stranger seen in a muddy pickup near the creek. Days earlier, a distant relative believed the sisters had run away, tired of chores and eager for adventure. None of these stories fit, but in the absence of facts, they took on life. Mary caught snippets as she walked from neighbor to neighbor, offering cold coffee and reassuring smiles. Her voice trembled when she said, "We just want our girls home." By midday, the searchers had found a few odd things. Single gum wrapper snagged on a branch upstream, scrap of cloth caught in a thicket, a small shoe print in a muddy patch. Each discovery raised hopes until detectives confirmed these were old and unrelated. Still, the team preserved every clue, tucking items into evidence bags and logging them. The sheriff insisted they treat every lead with care, no matter how small. Inside the temporary command post set up in an old grain silo, maps covered the wooden walls. Pushpins marked areas searched and those needing another look. A large whiteboard listed interviews scheduled for the afternoon. Neighbors, farmhands, passing delivery drivers, everyone who might have seen or heard something was on the list. Detective Ruiz tapped at her tablet, reviewing notes. She made sure no detail was overlooked. The time a farmhand refueled a tractor. The moment a mail carrier passed by. The exact words of a passing jogger who thought she saw shadows near the water. In the evening, the search paused as light faded. Lanterns glowed in the gathering dusk. Dogs tired, their handlers leading them back to vehicles. Volunteers returned to homes, offered sandwiches, and then left one by one. By the time the sun set, only the official team remained, huddled around a small fire near the creek. The sheriff scribbled in his notebook under a headlamp. Detective Ruiz reviewed the day's progress with him. They agreed the case had too few clues and too many possibilities, yet they would not give up. Back in the farmhouse, Mary lay across the bed in the girls' room. The wallpaper, once cheerful floral print, felt oppressive now. She closed her eyes against tears, imagining her daughters' faces. Had they been scared? Had they called out for her? Wade sat by the door, reading an old photo album. Every picture held memory Sienna's first steps. Bella's shy smile at Christmas, Chloe's proud graduation from middle school. He traced their faces with trembling fingers. Late that night, a tip came in. A man at the diner 12 miles away claimed he saw 3 girls matching the sisters' descriptions walking down the highway 2 nights ago. They wore the same clothes Mary described, Sienna in a yellow sundress, Bella in pink shorts, Chloe in blue jeans and a white shirt. The sheriff's team jumped into action, driving to the diner at once. The man was aged and frail but sincere. He said he stood outside the diner in the dark and saw the girls laughing as they walked toward the highway, pulling their shoes off to feel the cool asphalt. Then they turned toward a row of trees, assumed they belonged to the Walker farm, and did not think to stop them. Detectives found footprints near the diner, round-toed prints too small for adult shoes. They matched Bella's foot size almost exactly. The highway beside the diner ran through farmland like the Walkers. Sunset traffic thinned after twilight, making it possible the girls slipped by unnoticed. Yet why would they leave the farm so late when everyone knew they were missing? The detectives booked hotel rooms and prepared for another full day. They would search the highway's shoulder, examine the tree line, and question travelers at a nearby gas station. Dawn found the sheriff's team along the road. They canvassed each car that had stopped at the gas station the previous night. The attendant, a young woman named Lila, remembered one vehicle, a silver sedan with a dented bumper. She told detectives about a driver who looked nervous, someone who lingered far too long near the restroom and glanced around as if afraid of being seen. There was no license plate number, just a vague shape and a nervous energy. Lila's description matched that of a drifter who had been in the county months ago, selling scrap metal from a beat-up truck. He had been questioned then, but released for lack of evidence. Detective Ruiz felt a chill as she noted this. If the drifter returned, it could mean he had targeted the Walker girls. She called state police to check if any similar abductions had happened along his route. Meanwhile, they followed the footprints into the woods, hoping they led to more evidence. The forest floor was soft with pine needles, but the prints were too faint now. Still, metal glinted under a bush. A small hairpin shaped like a butterfly lay, half buried in dirt. Mary later confirmed Sienna loved hairpins like that. At the farmhouse, Wade and Mary joined detectives as they dusted the rooms again. They hoped to find something overlooked an open window, a smudge on the floor, a hidden note. Detective Ruiz used UV light to scan for fingerprints. Agents bagged the hairpin and gum wrapper for testing. Each item carried the possibility of answers. As night fell again, the investigation continued. The sheriff arranged for more cadaver dogs and underwater sonar to scan the creek bed. Detective Ruiz made arrangements for aerial search next week with infrared photography. Friends volunteered boats and ladders. Neighbors offered to comb the nearby abandoned well once more. The Walker family, though bruised by sleepless nights, stood firm. They thanked everyone for help, each smile forcing courage into their hearts. 3 days passed, then a week. The theory of the drifter lingered, the most plausible link to all the tidbits. But until physical evidence tied him to the crime, he remained just a suspect. The sheriff's office could not hold him without proof. So the search widened again, sent out missing person posters to churches and schools in distant counties, phoned animal shelters, and posted on social media pages. Volunteers printed flyers and hung them on every telephone pole they passed. Inside the Walker home, life became a grim routine of hope and heartbreak. Each dawn, Mary woke eager for the news, then sank into despair when none arrived. Wade spent hours mapping new areas on a giant board in the living room, numbering each grid square and writing notes in permanent marker. Aaron tried to help, learning how to track footprints and recognize signs of disturbance in grass and soil. Although he was young, he wanted to be useful. Went along in the sheriff's truck sometimes, notebook in hand. Detective Ruiz admired their strength. She promised them she would not rest until they knew the truth. Yet as days blurred into months, even she felt doubt creep in. The creek had yielded nothing more. The woods were vast and dense. The footprints vanished without a trace. The drifter had moved on. And still no girls. But in her heart, Ruiz believed the smallest clue could unlock everything. A voice on the wind, a piece of evidence overlooked, a memory recalled by someone just now waking from an uneasy sleep in Eve that could break the case open. So she continued, determined that this family's years of pain would not end in emptiness. For the Walkers, every dawn held a flicker of hope. And for Sheriff Thompson's team, that hope was the spark they needed to keep searching. 3 years had passed since that late summer afternoon when the Walker sisters vanished into thin air. The farm still stood where it always had, but its heart felt hollow. Mary rose each day before dawn, the kettle's whistle echoing in an empty kitchen. She poured herself a cup of coffee and stared out the window at the fields that once brought her joy. The rows of corn and beans grew just as tall and green as ever, but she saw only the shadows of her daughters playing along the creek.
Wade.
Carried on with the chores, but his shoulders slumped under the weight of unspoken grief. Each morning, he leaned on the fence posts a little longer, listening for the laughter that never came. Aaron, now 19, worked beside his father. He had grown taller and stronger, his teenage stoop replaced by the determined gait of a young man who bore more responsibility than any son should. He milked the cows and filled the troughs, but his mind often drifted back to that day. He remembered how Chloe coaxed him into playing hide-and-seek with the younger girls, how Sienna teased him for being too slow. He could almost hear their voices calling his name. Sometimes he woke in the night to the sound of his own voice. In his sleep he called out, "Chloe, Bella, Sienna," but silence answered him. The first anniversary of the disappearance arrived with a gathering under the oak trees by the creek. Neighbors brought flowers and lit candles in mason jars. A small wooden plaque, painted with the sisters' names and birth dates, leaned against an oak trunk. Mary and Wade stood together, holding hands though their fingers barely touched. Watched as friends read poems and offered gentle words of hope. Children released lanterns that floated above the water, their reflections dancing on the surface. When the flames faded, Mary walked the edge of the creek, each footstep a prayer. Wade stayed back, head bowed, unable to watch her grief so close. By the second anniversary, Mary had begun therapy. She sat in a small office with a counselor who helped her name the sea of feelings. Inside, guilt, anger, longing. Mary learned to breathe deeply, to sit with sadness without being consumed by it. Wade, more reluctant at first, joined a support group of fathers who had lost children. There he met men who shared his pain in quiet tones. They did not offer answers, but their companionship eased his loneliness. Aaron, too, found solace in a young farmers' club. He drove tractors and ran equipment repair, channeling his energy into work he could measure and fix. Despite the ache in their hearts, the Walkers kept the farm running. Mary planted rows of sunflowers each spring, a tradition she and Chloe had started years before. When the sunflowers bloomed, she imagined Chloe dancing among their bright faces. Wade repaired the barn roof with the same steady hands he used when the girls were small, to hang swings from the rafters. Rusty, the old retriever, still patrolled the fields, though his muzzle had grayed and his steps were slower. Waited by the gate each evening, hoping for children to return. Mary left bowls of water and bowls of kibble for him and whispered, "Thank you for still keeping watch." Over those 3 years, rumors came and went. Some said the girls had run away, tired of chores and country life. Others whispered about a stranger passing through. Detectives revisited the case file, but found no new leads. The sheriff's department assigned a fresh pair of eyes once a year to review cold cases. Detectives pored over maps and photographs, studying the creek from above and below. They interviewed neighbors again, looking for something they might have missed. Sometimes the Walkers followed up on these visits, walking detectives to every rock and fallen branch along the creek bank. But each time they searched, they found only mud and footprints that faded into the water. In the third summer, Aaron decided to hold a small fundraiser at the farm. He asked neighbors to bring instruments and join a barn dance. Proceeds would go to a new scholarship in his sister's names for the local school. The barn, once echoing, with the sound of tractors and wooden crates, filled with music and laughter that night. Families danced under strings of lights, and children played games in the hayloft. Mary and Wade watched from a corner, their hearts lifted by the joy around them. For one evening, the farm felt alive again, and the sisters' names rang out. In song, the next morning, as the lanterns lay damp on the ground, and the final guests said their goodbyes. Mary wandered down to the creek. She knelt by the water, trailing her fingers in the cool current. In her hand she held a ribbon that had fallen from a dancer's bouquet, a bright blue ribbon, fresh and strong. She tied it to a low branch, imagining it would drift away in a flood or flutter softly in the breeze like a message to her girls. Wade joined her, wrapping his arm around her shoulders, and together they watched the creek flow past, carrying hopes and memories downstream. Meanwhile, in the nearby town, a new hobby had taken hold. People called themselves magnet fishers. They carried heavy magnets on ropes and waded into creeks and rivers, hoping to pull up forgotten coins, old keys, or rusted artifacts. The past, lay hidden beneath mud and water, waiting to be discovered. At first, the magnet fishers thought the Walker Creek was just another spot to explore. They posted pictures online of license plates, wrenches, even firearms treasures from old dumps, and lost belongings. None of them knew that deeper in that same creek bed lay the sisters' last footprints, or that the current would one day bring a different kind of discovery. As autumn approached in that third year, Mary and Wade found themselves drawn together by quiet routines. They shared coffee on the porch each morning and walked the fence lines in the evening. They spoke little, but their presence comforted each other. Aaron returned home more often, his college break filled with late-night talks and shared meals. He asked his parents to tell him stories of Chloe's first day at school, of Sienna's favorite bedtime song, of Bella's shy smile when she gave her mother a flower. They shared memories as if each word might bring the girls home. By telling their stories, they kept their daughters alive in their hearts. The cold arrived and blanketed the farm in snow. The creek froze over and Wade broke the ice each morning so Rusty could still drink. Mary baked bread and cookies, wrapping them in cloth and hanging them on the neighbor's fence as a small gift of thanks. The neighbors returned the favor, with firewood and casseroles. In each act of kindness, the community wove a blanket of care around the Walker family, holding them steady against the constant ache of loss. In those 3 years, the farm had changed. A new generation of calves had been born, and old horses had passed on. The barn's wooden beams had weathered further, and the paint on the farmhouse had faded, yet in the gentle sway of the tall grass and the whisper of the wind through the oak leaves, the spirit of the missing sisters lingered. Every time a gust lifted a fallen ribbon or rustled a child's laughter in the distance, Mary and Wade felt their presence. And as winter melted into spring for the 4th time since the disappearance, the magnet fishers returned to the creek. They walked its banks at dawn, ropes coiled over shoulders, magnets glinting in the early light. They cast their lines into the cold water, listening for that deep metallic tug that meant a find. None of them knew what they might uncover, but each hoped for a curiosity in old coin, a rusted key, a relic of the past. In their quiet way, they brushed aside fallen branches and stirred up the creek bed, unaware that soon they would pull from the water something far more personal than any coin. The first real clue in a case that had haunted a family for 3 long years. ChatGPT said, "The morning was cool and misty when Josh Carter loaded his gear into the back of his pickup. He had discovered magnet fishing a few months earlier, after a chance conversation with a coworker who talked about pulling up old coins and relics from local rivers. Josh liked simple hobbies, nothing too noisy or crowded. Working in a hardware store all week left him craving peace on the weekends. So he packed his heavy-duty magnet, a sturdy rope, and his old gloves, and drove out toward the Walker Creek, where the water ran clear and slow through a shaded oak grove. When he arrived, the sun was just beginning to spill gold across the water. Dew dripped from branches, and tiny ripples spread across the surface as minnows darted beneath. Down the bank barefoot, wading in until the water reached his calves. He tied one end of the rope around his waist, testing its hold, then let the magnet slip from his hand into the creek's depths. The metal sank slowly, disappearing into the muddy bottom. He counted to 20, then gave the rope a gentle tug. Nothing. He lifted the magnet a few inches, then dropped it again in a slightly different spot. The routine relaxed him. Cast, wait, feel, pull, inspect. Often he found bottle caps, bent nails, the occasional padlock or rusted key. It was treasure hunting without the fuss of an auction or the headache of paperwork. Today he felt hopeful. The Walker Creek had never been fished before, at least not by him or anyone he knew. Maybe he would find something special. He cast again, farther downstream, where the current ran slowest, near an old fallen oak trunk. The water there was deeper, better for hidden objects. This time, when he pulled, he felt a sudden, sharp pull, unlike the soft scrape of a bottle cap. The rope resisted, then jerked free in his hands. He braced himself and leaned back, angling. His feet against the slippery stones. The magnet scraped along the bottom, catching on something heavy. Josh called out to his friend Mark, who stood on the bank with a camera. "Hey, give me a hand here," he shouted. Mark hurried down the bank, tripod swinging from his shoulder. Together they heaved on the rope, muscles straining. With a final pull, they tugged the magnettand, whatever it clung, tuned to the shallow water. A muddy metal box emerged, slick with silt and long submerged leaves. It looked like an old ammunition box, the kind you might see at a military surplus store. Rust ate through patches of green paint, and the lid was stapled shut with thick wire. Josh and Mark stared in silence for a moment, breath caught. This wasn't what they expected. "Can you pull it up onto the bank?" Josh asked. Mark stepped into the water, grabbed a corner of the box, and lifted it free of the creek. They carried it together to a dry patch where the sun had already begun to warm the sand. Josh knelt and wiped water and mud from the lid with his sleeve. He carefully cut through the wire, pried the lid open, and they peered inside. Their eyes widened. At the bottom of the box was a folded piece of oilcloth, stained dark with water and age. Josh reached inside with gloved hands and lifted out a small, dusty shoe. It was a child's shoe, the kind with a strap over the top and a tiny scuff on the toe. He set it gently on the grass, as if it might break. Under the shoe lay a faded bracelet made of thin silver links. Its charm read SB, under a tiny heart. Next to the bracelet rested a small, carved figurine, wooden bird painted red, its paint chipped in places. Mark snapped photos as Josh lifted the items one by one. The air felt heavy, and the creek's gentle trickle sounded far away. Josh said quietly, "These look like personal things, what we usually pull from a creek." Looked at Mark, voice shaking with a mix of excitement and dread. "I think this may belong to someone." Mark lowered his camera. "We should call someone," he said. "This is more than a hobby find." Josh pulled out his phone and dialed the sheriff's office. He explained that he had located a box in the Walker Creek with items that looked personal and possibly linked to a missing persons case. The dispatcher sounded alarmed and said she would notify Sheriff Thompson immediately. She asked Josh to secure the site and not move anything further. Within 20 minutes, to patrol. Cars rolled onto the narrow dirt lane. Their lights splashed across the bank in red and blue. Sheriff Cole Thompson and Detective Laura Ruiz stepped out, notebooks in hand. Thompson recognized Josh from community events around town. "Josh," he said, tipping his hat, "we get your message. Let's take a look." Josh guided them to the spot where the metal box sat open on a blue tarp someone had brought. Detective Ruiz crouched and examined the items, snapping notes in her pad. She asked Josh to recount exactly where he had fished the box from. The depth of the water, the precise location of the oak trunk. She marked the spot with flagging tape and told deputies to photograph the scene from multiple angles. Thompson examined the shoe, bracelet, and figurine with a frown. He had seen dozens of artifacts in his years on the force, but items this personal were rare. He turned to the Walkers' farmhouse across the field, just a quarter-mile away, and said, "Detective, notify the Walkers. Bring them here. We need to see these items." Detective Ruiz nodded and left to make the call. Josh and Mark stepped aside, watching as deputies sealed off the creek bank. The late morning sun beat down, and the moist earth smelled of moss and decay. Josh's stomach churned. Had he stumbled on evidence of something terrible? He felt guilty, grateful, and nervous all at once. Soon the Walkers drove onto the lane in their family SUV. Mary sat in the front passenger seat, her eyes red-rimmed. Wade parked behind the patrol cars, and Aaron leaned against the door, arms crossed. They approached hesitantly, each footstep echoing in the quiet field. Sheriff Thompson met them halfway. "Mary, Wade, Aaron," he said gently. "Thank you for coming so quickly. You have something I think you'll want to see." Mary's hands trembled as she followed the sheriff and detective to the blue tarp. Wade's face turned from curiosity to shock when he saw the child's shoe. He reached out, voice choked. "That's Bella's shoe." He knelt and touched the scuffed toe reverently, as if greeting a lost friend. Mary staggered, but Aaron caught her and supported her to a nearby tree. Detective Ruiz held out the bracelet. "This bracelet has initials that match Sienna's middle name," she said softly. "We need to confirm, but I wanted you to see it now." Mary gasped and pressed a hand to her mouth. Tears streamed down her cheeks, as she reached for the silver links. They felt cold and solid in her palm. She turned to Wade, voice broken. They were here. They were here all this time. Wade closed his eyes, and the breath he released trembled. He looked across the creek, years of fear and longing rushing through him. Aaron placed a hand on his father's shoulder, and together they faced the detective's wooden bird figurine. It must have been Chloe's. The parents held each item close, hands shaking, minds racing. Sheriff Thompson spoke quietly to Detective Ruiz. "Bag everything as evidence. We'll take it all back to the lab for cleaning and testing." He turned back to the walkers. "We have a lot to do now. We'll need statements, and this area will be a crime scene for some time. I'm so very sorry you had to find these items like this." Mary nodded, tears falling freely. "Thank you," she whispered, voice small. "Thank you for not giving up." The sheriff offered his arm, and Wade leaned on him as they began the slow walk back to the patrol cars. Aaron stayed a moment longer by the creek bank, staring at the spot where Josh had found the box. He knelt, touched the cold water, and closed his eyes. Nearby, Josh and Mark gathered their gear quietly. The creek bank was now lined with yellow tape and deputies in uniforms. Mark looked over at Josh and said, "You did the right thing." Josh nodded, though his heart still pounded. He watched the walkers drive away, pain and hope etched into their faces. By nightfall, the investigation had shifted. Underwater cameras scoured the creek bed, searching for any other evidence. Dogs trained to find human remains patrolled the banks. Detectives prepared search warrants for nearby barns and property. The small community that had rallied around the walkers 3 years ago came out again, this time with a new spark of hope. Volunteers brought coffee, sandwiches, and warm blankets for the officers working late. Inside his office, Sheriff Thompson pinned the walker items to a board under bright light. He circled the initials SB on a printed photo of the bracelet. He reviewed old reports and compared them with new data. The pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together. Detective Ruiz sketched a new timeline, placing the moments when the girls vanished beside the spot where the box had been hidden. Every scrap of evidence now mattered in a way it never had before. And for the walkers, the long years of grief and waiting had produced a glimmer of answers. They did not know what the future held, but they faced the coming days together. As they sat in their living room that night, the items displayed on the coffee table, Mary turned to her husband and said, "Now we know they were never far." Wade took her hand and squeezed it gently. "And now we will find out what happened." Outside, the creek flowed on, carrying bits of memory down its winding path, waiting to reveal the rest of its secrets. Forensic scientists worked through the night in the county lab. They cleaned the shoe, the bracelet, and the wooden bird with gentle brushes and clear solution. DNA swabs went on the bracelet's clasp and the inside of the shoe. Every fingerprint that could be lifted waited under bright lamps. Detective Ruiz and Sheriff Thompson stood beside the evidence table, watching each careful step. Finally, the results came back. The shoe held traces of Bella's DNA, and the bracelet matched Sienna. The bird's paint chips under the microscope carried hair from Chloe's favorite sweater. Now there was no doubt. These were the walkers' daughters. Armed with this proof, officers obtained a search warrant for the property where the drifter, Greg Palmer, had parked his truck 3 years earlier. The old shed stood back from the road behind a line of scrub pines. Its wooden walls leaned outward, and the door hung on broken hinges. Palmer had left town after the girls vanished, carrying scrap metal and passing through small towns without trace. He resurfaced briefly in a neighboring county to pawn tools, but he vanished again. How? Detectives returned, seeking signs that he might have hidden the girls' belongings here. Inside the shed, beams of sunlight cut through slats in the roof. Dust motes danced in the air as dogs trained to find human scent padded across the dirt floor. Levine, the cadaver dog, paused at a low shelf where a small box lay half hidden under an old tarp. The dog barked once, urgent, then pawed. Detective Ruiz pulled the tarp away to reveal a rusted container similar to the one in the creek, but without the silt. Inside, she found children's clothing stained with mud, a pink dress with a torn sleeve, a yellow hair ribbon, and a small carved turtle that no one had seen before. She bagged each item carefully. The sheriff called Wade and Mary to the scene. They drove slowly down the gravel road, hearts pounding. When they stepped into the shed, their stomachs twisted. The sight of the girls' clothes and the turtle-law gift Chloe had carved for her mother crumpled their hope and pain into one heavy moment. Mary sank to her knees, voice shaking as she whispered the girls' names. Wade stood behind her, hands on her shoulders, holding her up when the tears blurred her vision. Detective Ruiz knelt before them and laid out the items on a clean sheet. "We believe Mr. Palmer kept these here for years," she said softly. "We're continuing our search, but right now I want you to know we're finding your daughter's things. And that means we may finally learn what happened." Mary nodded, fresh sobs racking her body, but somewhere inside her, a small spark of relief ignited. Wade stared at the wooden turtle, memories flooding, Chloe's voice instructing him on each cut of her carving knife, her proud grin when she finished. Outside, officers scoured the land around the shed. They found footprints matching the girls' sizes pressed into soft mud beside a concrete slab. Beneath that slab lay a narrow chamber, an old root cellar built long ago. Inside, layers of soil and dead leaves concealed a grim secret. Forensics teams entered carefully, lights revealing the shapes of small bodies. The girls lay side by side, sheltered yet hidden for all these years. The paramedics confirmed what no one wanted to hear. All three had died soon after vanishing, hurt by wild animals, but lost to human cruelty. The walkers held each other as the news reached them. Grief overwhelmed them anew, raw and vivid. Every hope of finding the girls alive shattered, but answers replaced the endless questions. Mary closed her eyes and saw the sisters as they were, laughing by the creek, chasing fireflies at dusk, dancing in the barn with lantern light. Now, she would never see them that way again, but she could say they were found, and that mattered more than she had believed possible. Sheriff Thompson stood by the root cellar's edge, thousands of thoughts racing through his mind. He ordered the scene preserved for evidence and arranged for the girls to be taken to the coroner's office. Detective Ruiz drove the walkers home in silence.
Ow.
The farmhouse lights burned inside against the early dusk. Then inside, Aaron waited, pacing the hallway until he saw his parents' car. Mary opened the door, her face pale but peaceful. She stepped inside and hugged Aaron tight. Wade crouched to gather them both, and a quiet settled. In the days that followed, the community gathered for a final, private farewell at the creek. Under the old oak trees, a small wooden platform held 3 simple pine coffins, painted white and adorned with wildflowers. Friends and neighbors formed a circle around the creek's edge. A gentle breeze carried petals across the water. One by one, those who knew the sisters spoke softly stories of their smiles, their kindness, the mischievous way Chloe teased her little sisters. Aaron read a poem he wrote, his voice steady, recounting the sisters' laughter that still echoed in his heart. Then Wade and Mary stepped forward. Wade's voice broke as he read a letter written to the girls. He spoke of the long nights they spent lighting the farmhouse porch for their return, the hours he waited on the bridge above the creek. Mary followed, her tears glistening in the lamplight, telling the girls how proud she was of their strength and how much she loved them. She released a handful of sunflower seeds, Chloe's favorite, into the wind. They scattered like small, bright hopes. When the ceremony ended, the platform was gently lowered into the creek. The water carried the coffins downstream toward the small clearing where the creek joined the river. As the white boxes drifted away, everyone watched until only ripples remained. In that moment, the creek seemed to carry the sisters home. Back at the farmhouse, life changed but continued. Mary cleared the girls' room, carefully sorting their things. Some items she kept in memory boxes, others she planted in the garden bellas. Ribbon tied around a rose bush, Sienna's bracelet buried beneath a sunflower, Chloe's wooden turtle placed on the windowsill. Each day, she watered those spots, watching new flowers bloom. Wade repaired the barn door that had hung crooked. Since the search began, he built a small bench by the creek, carving each board with his daughter's initials. He sat there each morning, coffee in hand, watching the water flow past. He spoke to the creek as if the girls might answer, telling them about the day, the weather, the new calf in the field. Aaron returned to college, but came home every weekend. He worked on the farm, earned money for the scholarship fund in his sisters' names, and kept their memory alive. His voice when he told new friends about his sisters was calm and warm. He spoke of their laughter and kindness, the way they lit up every room. In that way, the sisters continued to live in every story he told. Detective Ruiz closed the case with a thick binder of reports, photographs, and evidence. She wrote a final letter to the Walkers, promising to keep in touch and to update them if any new information surfaced. She remembered their faces the day. She showed them the first items from the creek, the hope in their eyes, the tears mingled with relief. That memory stayed with her, a reminder of why she became a detective. One spring morning, 2 years after the discovery, Mary and Wade hosted a small gathering by the creek. They planted 3 willow trees in honor of their daughters. Willows bent over the water, long branches trailing like silver curtains. Each tree had a small plaque: Bella -2019, Sienna -2019, and Chloe -2019. Neighbors brought seedlings, and children helped dig small holes. Rusty, now very old, lay in the shade of an oak, his gray muzzle lifted in contentment. As the planting finished, Mary gathered the group for a moment of silence. The sun glinted on the water, and a gentle breeze whispered through the leaves. For the first time, Mary felt a quiet peace. The farm still held memories of loss, but it also held new growth flowers, trees, children's laughter. She squeezed Wade's hand and whispered, "They are part of this land now." Wade nodded, looking at the willows. "They will grow." "Here," he said softly, "their roots run deep." Aaron smiled at his parents and then at the creek. He imagined his sisters watching over them, proud of the farm they loved and the family that survived. In that place of sorrow and discovery, new life sprang forward, a promise that even after the darkest times, a gentle hope could blossom. And so, the Walker farm remained a place of memory and healing. The creek flowed on, carrying stories of the past into the future. The oak trees and willows stood guard. In every rustle of leaves, in every sunflower bloom, the sisters' presence lived on silent, but always near, in the hearts of those who loved them.